Today, delegations from Moscow and Kyiv are meeting for a second round of talks in hopes of bringing about a ceasefire to this wretched war. It comes after a day of more brazen attacks by the Russian military against civilian targets, including a TV tower in Kyiv and a government building in the center of Kharkiv. Heading into negotiations, one can only hope that the Kremlin is willing to drop some of its more maximalist demands, like the demilitarization of the Ukrainian government. But a lasting peace will also require a recognition of the recklessness of U.S. policy that has created the conditions for this war and the need for a new security arrangement between Russia and the West. This is a war of aggression by Vladimir Putin, a real piece of shit guy, but it's also a conflict that was predicted by countless U.S. diplomats and foreign policy scholars for decades who warned against expanding NATO, particularly against bringing Ukraine into NATO. They said this would happen, and it did. During last night's State of the Union address, however, it was clear that the president is not at all interested in a rethink of foreign policy in Eastern Europe, not at all interested in peace or off-ramps to this war. Instead, Joe Biden struck a triumphalist tone and promised to continue isolating and degrading Russia.
We are right now enforcing powerful economic sanctions. We're cutting off Russia's largest banks from the international financial system, preventing Russia's central bank from defending the Russian ruble, making Putin's $630 billion war fund worthless. We're choking Russia's access. We're choking Russia's access to technology that will sap its economic strength and weaken its military for years to come. And tonight, I'm announcing that we will join our allies in closing off American airspace to all Russian flights, further isolating Russia and adding additional squeeze on their economy. He has no idea what's coming. The ruble has already lost 30% of its value. The Russian stock market has lost 40% of its value, and trading remains suspended. The Russian economy is reeling, and Putin alone is the one to blame. The Ukrainians are fighting back with pure courage, but the next few days, weeks, and months will be hard on them.
Well, I guess we'll see how that goes over inside the Kremlin, which has been engaged in some loose talk about nuclear war recently. You know, it's telling when the president is discussing this war in terms of weeks and months, instead of trying to figure out how it can end right now. Protracted conflict will only increase human suffering on the ground. It will not advance anyone's geopolitical goals. Other world superpowers recognize this and are coming forward to play a more constructive role in ending the conflict. Ukraine has asked China to attempt to broker a peace deal as well. According to a report from Chinese state media, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba spoke with China's Foreign Minister Yang Wi yesterday. Yang said that the People's Republic is, quote, extremely concerned about harm to civilians and, quote, laments the breakout of fighting. In previous public statements, Chinese diplomats have attempted to strike a balance between the two sides. China's foreign ministry has said that the security of one country should not come at the expense of the security of other countries, implying that Russia shouldn't be invading. China has also said that regional security cannot be realized through the expansion of military blocs, in criticism of Ukraine's desire to join NATO. China has also hit out at efforts to sanction Russia. Worth contrasting those statements with those in the State of the Union last night and those made by the U.S. State Department this week when asked specifically about ongoing peace talks. State Department spokesperson Ned Price on Monday slammed those negotiations.
You would be right to color us skeptical of what it is that Moscow intends. What we've said before, including last week, applies equally today. Diplomacy at the barrel of a gun, diplomacy at the turret of a tank, that is not real diplomacy.
If only there was some known diplomatic procedure that commonly took place while fighting was still ongoing. An agreement whereby both sides cease firing, if you will. Maybe the department doesn't even bother asking applicants these days if they know what a ceasefire is. One thing's for sure, if China is able to help hammer out a lasting peace deal, it would be a huge blow to U.S. claims of global leadership. Of course, China isn't alone in its reluctance among major countries to take sides to push for a rapid end to the war. Longtime adversaries India and Pakistan have both called for fighting to end, without blaming either Russia or Ukraine. Mexico also said Tuesday that it would not join the long list of countries sanctioning Russia. The ACLU is suing the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, as news breaks that the state has officially begun investigating the families of transgender children. Last week, Abbott and his attorney general, Ken Paxton, laid the groundwork for persecution of transgender kids in the state by decreeing that any form of gender-affirming health care is a form of child abuse. Abbott ordered the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services to investigate any reported cases and encourage state civil servants like teachers and nurses to snitch on kids that are in the process of medically transitioning. Already reports of neighbors turning on neighbors. The New York Times reports that the first target of this assault on trans youth is an employee of the state's Protective Services Agency and their 16-year-old transgender child. According to a court filing by the ACLU, the employee was placed on administrative leave last week and on Friday was actually visited by an investigator from the agency, which is also seeking medical records. So far, the family is refusing to comply. They said they are terrified about the well-being of their child. The ACLU is asking courts to block the state's demand for medical records and to invalidate the governor's ongoing persecution of transgender kids. This really is one of the more sickening things happening in the U.S. right now, and that says a lot. And finally, the capitalists who own baseball teams have canceled opening day in a bid to try to crush the players' union. No new labor deal was struck before the arbitrary deadline on Tuesday. It was a deadline imposed by MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred to avoid scrapping games at the start of the season. It's not a real deadline. Despite the sport not being able to exist without the players, owners refuse to meet the union's demands to share some more of the revenue pie with workers who have seen their wages decline on average over the last 4 years. The owners themselves, they've been doing great. As the LA Times notes, quote, roughly 3/4 of the game's primary owners have net worths north of 10 figures, including 2 with net worths north of 11 figures, and all but 2 of them have seen their franchise values appreciate since their purchases, often extraordinarily. The owners feel they can strengthen their negotiating position by canceling games. That's why they locked the players out to begin with more than 90 days ago. Most owners are billionaires and can weather it if early games are canceled, particularly when weather is still cold and attendance is low. But players don't get paid if games aren't played. You know who else doesn't get paid? The tens of thousands of stadium workers across the country who rely on the baseball season to feed their families. Also, that capitalists like billionaire Pete Angelos can keep making a fortune, ensuring that the Baltimore Orioles lose 100 games every season. Rob Manfred and the rest of the owners, they can eat shit. Hey, thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our new videos. Also, if you want to see Means Morning News in its complete form, not just the clips we post here, head on over to Means TV and get access to all our new episodes and our entire backlog, plus tons of other great movies and original TV shows.